Hello and welcome to Lesson 5 of Higher Computing Science Web Design and Development. Last time we looked at display, block inline and none, and today we're looking at float. You can see we've got float left, float right, and we've got clear both. As always, I recommend the W3 Schools website, where you can learn all about CSS layout for float and clear. It tells you that the float property specifies how an element should float. Wow, isn't that helpful? It gets better as you go down. The clear property specifies what elements can float beside the cleared element and on which side. We don't need to really care about this. The clear property is basically for cancelling out floats. So what is floats? Floats are used for positioning so that you can allow block elements to appear side by side. A great example is this one here, float right. So in this example, the image has been given the style of float right, and you can see that the paragraph appears to the left of it. So this image would have been first and then some text, but if we float it to the right, and it allows the following text to squeeze up here in the space that this floating right picture has left. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense. What we're going to use it for is on this slightly updated website that you can find a download link for in the description, where we have these three sections on the home page. Now I mention sections because on this home page, I have added to the main content area 3 sections. So if you watched the semantic element video, you'll notice section was one area, one tag that we didn't cover. So we're covering it now. Sections are useful for when you have multiple parts of your page that are similar, but they're for strictly separate things. So in this case, this is just information about the website. Here we're talking about studying, and in this section, it's about what happens when you succeed. Oh yes. Each section has a header, a paragraph, and an image. The images have been given a width. And this is what it looks like, but it's not very clear where the sections start and finish. So let's add a little bit of CSS to our sections to make that clearer. Now previously, we've used this sort of inline styling, it's not inline styling, but we've added all our styles in the CSS file, the external CSS file, in a line. What I prefer is to do it stacked, so that each style is on a new line. So what did I say we were going to do? We're going to change the background color so that we can see these more clearly. Let's just choose magenta. We're going to remove this later, and we'll save this. We'll go back to our website and refresh. So you can see that this is the first section. Here's the second, here's the third. When floating elements, whether it's a section or an image, it's always a good idea to have a set width for these sections or these elements that are going to float or appear side by side. So what I'll do is I'll also add a width. Now the width, I'm just going to choose an arbitrary width of 300 pixels. There's no real reason. I just want them to be that size so that they will fit side by side. So now my sections are taking up a little bit more space height-wise because this text is wrapping, but they're all taking up the same width. Now let's start floating these side by side and see what happens. So these sections, I'm going to set them to float left and save that. And what should happen is the home page will budge up to the left, the home page section rather, and this study section will try and budge up to the left of this floating section, and the success section should budge up to as close to the left of that one. Let's see it in action. Oh yes. So these sections are all floating to the left, they're budging up to the left and allowing any other content to sit to the right of it. But we do have an issue. Look at this. This is the footer. The footer should not be floating. Oh dear. But it does. And that's because this section is floating all the way to the left. It's trying to float to the left because that's what we said in the CSS. And even though it's in a main section that is not floating, and you may have noticed that that main section kind of disappeared because the blue background's gone, that's because floating elements, they kind of take up no space at all, really. They take up no space, so there's no background for that main section to display because it technically has content that doesn't take up any space. I know this is all quite confusing. I'm even finding it very difficult to explain. But all you need to know is that these floating sections budge up to the left because they're floating to the left, and elements that technically should be below are also going to appear to the right of those floating elements. We want to stop this. So let's use the clear feature. If we look at W3 schools, it says the CSS clear property specifies what elements can float beside the cleared element and on which side. But the only property that we're allowed to change or set, the only value we're allowed to set to the clear property is both. And let me show you what happens. What we should do is set the footer to have a clear property of both. And this basically stops it from floating at all. If we save this and refresh our website, the footer now appears at the bottom, beneath these floating elements. Okay, that's pretty cool. You might be wondering what happens if we float these to the right. Let's take a look. Let's change the float to right. Save it, refresh it, they float to the right. But notice that the home page, which is the first element, the first section is the home page section, that goes to the right first. And then the next section, the study section, appears next. So they're all budging up to the right in order. And the footer's cancelling, it's cleared so it can go below these floating sections. I preferred it when they were floating to the left, because then my content appeared in the order I wanted it to. Bloop. Now let's say I want these images to appear, let's say to the right of this text. I want the image to be up here on the right, just to make it look a bit neater. Let's try that. What we should do is say image, img, and let's say float right. Save, refresh. Oh dear, why is it not allowing the text to appear to the left of it? The reason for that is the order in which these elements appear. Within these sections, it's the heading first, then the paragraph, then the image. And we're telling the image to float to the right, but there's nothing after it to take up the space on the left. So we need to reorder these. I'm going to cut this out and put it above the paragraph. I'm going to do that for each of these three images. And I'll save it. And I'll refresh my page. Ta-da! So now you can see our images are floating to the right of the text within their sections, and each of these sections are floating to the left. You might be thinking, this looks disgusting. It does, this whole website does. But there are a couple of things we could do to make this look a bit better. One thing that's not so great is that they're all different heights. So it's got this sort of stepped look, which may not be a problem if we didn't have this magenta background. So we could remove that. Now it looks a bit more normal. But the other problem is they're all so bunched up together. They're so closely bunched up. The text comes right up to this image, here and here. They're all so close together. I don't like this. But that's for another video. The next one will be about margins and padding, and that is how you can space things out a little bit nicer. Today's video was all about floating things to the right, to the left, and how to clear so that things don't float when they don't need to. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I'll see you in the next one.